Hello everyone and welcome to our latest webinar. Thanks for joining us. My name is Rob Newton. I'm Marketing Manager here at Visual Impact, and today we are discussing the new product announcements from Sony at IBC. And one in particular I'm sure has got everyone excited, but we'll come to that a bit later. And I'm here with Cinematographer and Sony Alister Chapman. Hi Alister, welcome to the webinar.
Good morning everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Hopefully you're all
a little tired this morning.
Yes.
I got off a plane rather late last night, straight from the show floor at IBC, and I've spent the last 4 days giving my talk about the FX9, which we'll get into in a little bit, over and over and over and over and over, a bit like a robot actually. But,
why does everyone always ask the same question?
Well, everyone they just walk up and it's just like, tell me about the camera. So it's just like, you just have to start at the beginning and work your way through it.
Sure.
But yeah, lots of interest, huge interest in it. So we'll get into it in a minute, and
yes,
I shall do it all over again.
That's right. Yes. So if you manage to get through, that's excellent. And we've got some people still registering, so we'll just go through some of the housekeeping issues, or not issues, but things. Please remember that you should have a question box on your screen. Please use it. You can ask questions throughout the webinar. You don't have to wait to the end. In fact, a lot of people try and wait to the end, and then they end up not having their question answered.
So if you have a question, just fire it into us right now, and then we'll work down through the list as we go along and get as many of them answered. And there's no stupid questions, no silly questions. We'll get them. Try and answer them all as best I can.
Yep, brilliant. And we've got a couple from the States and one from here in the UK as well via email, so we'll go through those as well and ask them. And excellent. Yeah, we've got Brian and Sam already.
Yeah, some good questions there, and I do have the answers for the ones that have been asked so far. So that's excellent.
And as a president from the United States once said, please have the questions for the right answers we have here today. We don't want any questions that we don't have answers for. So, okay, housekeeping. Yeah, so this question box, as I said, please use it. We're also recording the webinar, so if you want to listen to it afterwards or send it to a colleague, or just remind yourself just how fantastic Alister was in talking about the camera, then you'll be able to do that. So we'll send you a link in a couple of days' time for that. You may not know, as well as the webinars, we also run open days, masterclasses, product launches here in Teddington. So if you want to meet Alister in person, you don't have to go all the way to IBC.
And I'm quite sure we'll have some FX9 ones very soon, I would imagine.
Yes, for sure. So you'll be able to get all the information here from Alister, and then come and see the camera and Alister in person, and have a play with it, put it on your shoulder and see just how good this exciting camera is. So we do all of that, and all the details obviously are on our website, visuals.co.uk, and go to the events page. Again, while everyone's registering, we're just going to have a bit of an audience poll so that Alister can see what sort of people are attending, so he can adapt his presentation accordingly. So the poll question is, what camera are you currently using or shooting?
Yeah, it's just be interesting, I think, just to see who's here and what you're using. So I'm quite sure we probably have a pretty good idea of what the highest number will end up being. I mean, if you are an FS7 shooter, you obviously have to have some interest in this camera. But it'd be interesting to see how many F5 and 55 owners are signing in. What? No Canon? Oh, a few Canon users. No Panasonic users at all. Okay, I thought we'd see a few more of those, perhaps.
Yes, yeah, because it's
an interesting camera too. I mean this is the thing, isn't it? Now, nobody makes a bad camera.
No.
They're all good cameras. I mean, whether it's and dare I say, from Blackmagic all the way up through Canon, Sony, Panasonic, etc. They're all good cameras. So the thing today is finding the one that fits what you want to do and how you want to work. And your budget and everything else. And there's that big question: is how easy is it to make it look good? So it's all very well having this great camera that's got big fat numbers of 6 million pixels or whatever. How easy is it for you to use it? How easy is it for you to get the end result that your client your customer needs. That's what we all need. And then of course the bottom line question is, how quickly can I pay for it? Because there's no point in spending £20,000 on a camera if you're only going to get £50 each time you hire it out to do a job. That's when you look at the budget cameras. So there's that balancing act that we all have to do. Is what does this cost? How long will it take me to to pay for it to earn its keep, and all of those things. So I don't think there are any bad cameras on the market right now. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. Some are lower cost and maybe a bit weak in one area, but that cost offset means that makes it a viable option.
And I guess, does it fit into your ecosystem too?
Well, yes, the ecosystem is a big thing, and I think one of the things we'll see with the FX9 for the FS7 owners is that it's a direct swap pretty much. There's very little you'll have to change. So are we?
The scores on the door.
Scores on the door.
Oh, there's a few more people haven't voted, so please.
Maybe they don't have the cameras in our list, or don't even have a camera at all. Maybe they hire and rent cameras.
Yes, So if it isn't on there, then you could maybe use the question box just to say, I'm currently using a whatever it is.
And we do have a few questions in already, which we will come to in a little bit.
Okay, so members will close the poll now and get on with the presentation. I'm sure everyone's excited to hear all about it.
So we've got almost 60% FS7, 24% FS5, 10% F5 55, 7% C300, and no EVA1 users out there.
Interesting. Okay, excellent. Okay, on
with the show. So what's new from Sony at IBC? Because this isn't just about the FX9, but to be fair, the other cameras and bits and pieces that Sony launched really didn't get a look in because of the FX9. So Sony also did launch their Z750 full-size shoulder camera, and we'll look at that in a moment. The FX9 digital cinema camera, and a new line of E-mount cinema lenses, really sort of aimed at the FX9. So the Z750 full-size 4K camcorder from Sony. It was a shame actually, because this is a nice camera, but it really got buried by the FX9. That's the fashion, that's the trend now. People want the cinema cameras. But this is a really nice offering from Sony. So to be honest, there's not a lot to talk about with it, because it is what it is, which is a full-size shoulder mount XAVC based camcorder. And there are others already out there from Sony that are very similar in specifications and what they can do. But the big deal about the Z750 is this is the first time we've seen on a full-size shoulder camera 3 2/3 inch 4K CMOS global shutter sensors. So for a news application, for those guys that have to do those news scrums where there's a press pack all snapping away taking their photographs, the fact that this camera doesn't have any rolling shutter at all means that it's going to be fantastic in those particular applications. So this really is fair and square aimed at television news and that type of production. So
were you surprised? Sorry, were you surprised that Sony did produce another shoulder mount camera? Because I know we've had.
I was actually.
I mean, we've had discussions and polls here about, would you buy another shoulder mount camera? And quite a few people have said no.
And these aren't cheap cameras. These are expensive cameras. And I was surprised because they've got the Z PXW, the Z450, or is it 400? 450, isn't it? Yes. And that's actually done fairly well. And that's a single chip camera, but that's done really well for them. And that sort of hit quite a nice sweet spot with price and everything else, because it's single chips, a bit cheaper to manufacture and everything else. This is now a flagship camera. It's quite a bit more expensive. But it also now has S-Log3 hybrid log gamma, 2020 color, so it's very good for future HDR production. The 3 4K sensors, they're pretty big, relatively speaking, compared to the the Z450 pixels. These are bigger pixels, so it's better in low light, better dynamic range. It really is actually quite a nice camera. 120 frames per second in HD. So it's lots of applications, lots of areas where this camera is very, very strong. And I do see it being very popular. And I did hear rumors of some really big orders for it from some of the broadcasters. So it's obviously is a very interesting camera, but it's expensive. It's not a camera that is going to be, I don't think a lot of freelancers will buy it, to be honest. I just think it's too expensive for a lot of freelancers, unless you have a contract and you're contracted to do X number of days for a station and they say
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is the camera we need, because everything else now is so much cheaper, you've got to be really sure that you're going to make your money back on something like this. So I mean, yes, there's a place. So I see it being something that the broadcasters, the production houses will buy to replace perhaps aging HD only cameras like PXW-700s and all those cameras that are really getting quite long in the tooth now, for their in-house crews or crews that they subcontract, etc., rather than being a freelancer's camera. I think maybe the days of freelancers owning cameras like this, unless you've got a good contract in place where you know you're going to get the work and pay for it, I think it's difficult.
Yeah. Okay.
So moving on, and we'll come to the lenses at the end. We won't miss them out. PXW-FX9 digital cinema camera. This is the one that really everybody at IBC, at the Sony stand, wanted to see. I mean, there were times if I walked off the Sony booth away from the cameras for a minute, I couldn't actually get back to them. You can see this big crowd of people all scratching their heads looking at it, probably with questions to ask, but I couldn't get anywhere near it to go and help them out with answering their questions. So the headlines are 6K full frame sensor, 15 plus stops of dynamic range, dual base ISOs, Venice color science, full frame variable ND filter, new viewfinder, improved urban ergonomics. And I put this one as a headline because I think it is actually, for a lot of people, time code in and out and gen lock on the camera body. So let's start diving into it. I've got lots of pictures of it and a little bit of a little bit of background information on it. Actually, you won't see a lot of pictures of these cameras floating around right now because about 2 weeks ago it was going to be black, and now it's the sort of Venice silvery color, and it does look really nice. Actually, I think it's very smart was a word that was used a lot. It does look quite smart. I think it's nice to not have a black camera for a change, to have something that isn't black. I mean, I know there's reasons for black cameras. They're less shiny, they don't catch the light, they don't cause reflections, but it does look quite smart. I think it's a good looking camera. So let's start at the very front of the camera. So we have Sony's locking E-mount on the front. So it's E-mount, so it takes all of your standard E-mount lenses. So anything you've got this E-mount will go on this camera, whether that's your Metabones adapter or your Sony stills lenses, they'll all just go straight on. But with the locking E-mount, it clamps down on the lens so it doesn't wobble, twist. There's no silly little springs holding the lens on. It's not going to sag or flop around. And that E-mount was actually designed to take the weight of a heavy PL lens.
Right.
So when they developed this on the FS7 Mark II, they developed the mount really strong, and then they found that the problem was that the chassis of the camera would break because the mount was so strong. So the FS7 Mark II actually has an upgraded chassis to take that extra weight because the lens mount is so strong that you don't want the chassis breaking first. You do actually want probably the lens mount to be the first thing that breaks, not the chassis of the camera. So it is very strong. The same mount that is now on Venice. So if you take Venice's PL mount off, behind the Venice camera's PL mount is exactly the same mount. And this is part of Sony's philosophy, is one mount. To ultimately, I think, have almost every single camera, and I think this will filter down to those shoulder cameras eventually. This mount, but then perhaps instead of having 2 3/8" sensors, they'll have a Super 35 sensor and with a B4 adapter on that E-mount, so you can still use all the ENG lenses and zoom ranges and everything else, and get that flexibility that way. Now, big thing about this, and this is over and over and over, I had to reiterate this on the booth. It's a 6K full frame sensor. It's designed specifically for the ground up for this camera. It is not the Venice sensor. It's a brand new sensor. Venice doesn't have autofocus. This does, and I'll come on to that in more detail in a bit. And it does not record or output 6K, no matter what. Even so far, what I've been told, and bear with me on this a little bit, there is no printed roadmap for this camera. So Sony, typically when they launch a camera, they'll give you an idea. So version 1 will do this, version 2 will do this, version 3 firmware will do this and that. There are planned to be lots of firmware updates for this camera. The list of things that they are looking at adding to this camera is huge, but what they haven't said is this will come first, this will come last, what the order. They're still trying to figure out what we, the end users, want. So if you go to your dealer, it might be worth just sort of mentioning, actually, of the list that I've heard that might come for me, they need to prioritize X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And that's probably how to be decided what comes in what order.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, the 6K output is just not on the radar, not on the roadmap at all currently.
Excellent.
Now, yeah, go on.
So I was going to say, the other burning question is straight from Brian, I think, which I think everyone is asking.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know if you want to answer that one now, which is...
So does the FX9 replace the FS7? And the short answer is no. The longer answer is a little bit. So the FX9 is a new model. It is more expensive than the FS7 Mark II. It will sit above the FS7 line, and the FS7 line will continue to be sold. Now, it wouldn't surprise me at all, to be honest, to see the FS7 disappear, and the FS7 II continue.
Yeah.
I think that sector is going to be too crowded with 3 cameras similarly priced. Yes, the FX9 is more expensive. There is a gap. But then to have an FS7, an FS7 II, and an FX9 all within a few £1000s of each other is too many. My feeling is, and this is just my gut feeling, this is not from Sony, is that the FS9 will fade away. The FS, I've got on my product notes too. I'm too tired. I've been doing it. The FS7 will fade away as a product you can buy. The FS7 Mark II will continue for a very long time, and because I'm kind of thinking, if you get rid of the FS7, you can bring the price of the FS7 II down a bit. That's kind of my thought. There would be, I don't know, it's speculation, absolutely speculation. But my thought would be this will come in. So the list price of this is €11,000. I don't know what VI's price will be. That's probably still to be determined. But typically dealer price is less than that. So I'm going to guess £10,000-ish, thereabouts. That puts a bit of pressure on the FS7 Mark II price, I think. So Sony would probably like to take that down a little bit. But to do that, you've got to make some space. And I think the FS7 will feel the pinch.
Well, I think that's...
Now, in terms of users and owners, don't panic. Of course, Sony would love everybody to rush out and place their orders, and Visual Impact here they're ready to take those orders.
Yes, please send them in.
I'm quite sure that's what Sony would like, is everyone to ditch their FS7s and go to this camera. But the FS7 is still an amazing workhorse camera. The FS7 is no different today to what it was before this camera was announced. And the FS7 is still the camera that every producer, director, whatever in the land knows and will ask for a very long time. Rental houses are full of them. VI, I know, have a large fleet of them in rental here. So that isn't going to change overnight. With any new camera, it takes a while for people to find the little things that perhaps, why does it do that? Or why doesn't it do that, perhaps? And then with this camera in particular, the firmware, there's not going to be everything in the first version of the firmware, so it will be a while before this, perhaps, who knows, becomes the dominant camera that replaces the FS7. But even then, there's still going to be space for the FS7 in the market. If you're just doing news, if you're just doing documentaries, corporate videos, everything else, absolutely, it does not make your FS7 obsolete or anything else. It really, really doesn't. Having said that, it is a really, really nice camera and has some really, really nice features. So you might want to move up to it. And I think, we're all running businesses here. We have to put our business heads on sometimes and say, you know what, will this make me more money?
Head over heart.
Exactly. The heart, my heart's screaming out to get my hands on one of these. Because
you really need it.
I've seen the pictures. That's the thing. And I have some frame grabs for you. Ungraded frame grab. Well, I say ungraded, they've just had the LUT put on. I'll show those in a little bit. So a bit about Bayer sensor, because actually this is important. So a 4K Bayer sensor, such as the one in the FS7, won't give you a 4K resolution image. No one's ever hidden this, but
all manufacturers do it.
And all the manufacturers are saying, but we tend to forget it, and I think the camera manufacturers are quite good at not reminding us that this is the case, or they have been certainly. Moving on, yes. So a 4K Bayer sensor, such as the one in your FS7, doesn't actually give you a 4K resolution image. It's a 4K sized frame, but what's in it is probably about 3K resolution. Depends on what you're shooting, how much green is in there and things like that. So it varies a little bit from shot to shot. But a typical FS7 doesn't give you a 4K picture. What you do get, though, is a good image. I mean, nobody's complaining about the pictures largely in terms of resolution from the FS7, so it's not like, oh my God, I've got to get rid of it today. However, the 6K sensor that's in the FX9, when it's then downsampled and debayered to produce that 4K, it's going to mean that your 4K really, really is 4K.
Yeah.
So you are actually going to see a 30%-ish increase in resolution in the recorded picture, but the file size is no bigger.
Oh.
And if you think about it, if Sony do make, huge if, somewhere down the road, the ability to take that 6K signal out and record it, even if you handle it very carefully in post and debayer it in a very, very carefully in post, the most you'll get in terms of resolution, 4.2K typically.
Yes.
So the benefit of having 6K over a 4K recording actually would be very, very small. Yes, there's a benefit, but it's small.
Yep.
But your file size is twice as big.
Yes.
To do that. So I think this is a really quite clever move. It's quite a smart move.
Yep.
Downsampling in the camera keeps the file size the same, keeps the workflow the same, the codecs are the same. So migrating to this camera, you haven't got to change anything about your workflow, post-production, etc. It's all the same. But you get better resolution. And your better color as well. That's the other thing, because the color's sampled much higher. So those of you that do chroma key work and things like that will find that this camera will key much better.
Yeah.
It will give you much better chroma key than an FS7 can currently, because of that higher color resolution and everything else, because we start off at 6K. So I think this is actually a sensible thing. Yeah. Now, limitations. Now, there's going to be so many firmware upgrades for this camera, but in version 1, as the camera comes initially, there's going to be a few things that the FS7 will be able to do that the FX9 can't.
Right.
So currently the FX9 is limited, and this perhaps won't change, 30 frames per second recording UHD from the 6K full frame sensor.
Right.
You know, reading 6K full frame off this sensor, you're reading twice as many pixels as you are in UHD. So at the moment there is a frame rate limit.
Yeah.
Whether way down the road that might get increased, I don't know. I'm suspecting not. So I think I wouldn't ever count on having more than 30 frames per second from the full frame readout on this camera. However, you can do 60 frames per second if you switch it to Super 35. Now, a lot of people start talking about, oh, this is the crop mode for this camera. Yeah, kind of it is. That's not incorrect. You're cropping into the sensor, but then the UHD Super 35 mode is exactly the same as an FS7's UHD Super 35. The sensor area is the same. It's 4K, the same as the FS7, 4K pixels, recording UHD. Same as an FS7 does when recording UHD. What there isn't going to be initially is 4K DCI, the 17:9 4K.
Right.
That will come most likely in the first firmware update. So it's going to come, but won't be there initially. So you've got to go down to Super 35 if you want 60 frames per second at launch with UHD recording. Although, interestingly, there's 120 frames per second in HD possible from full frame by using a 2K full frame scan mode. So it reads the full frame size sensor at 2K to record HD in up to 120 frames per second. Now, we did a lot of testing of this on the booth because you're reading the sensor differently. Now, on the FS7, when you go into HFR and you read that sensor differently, you read it at 2K or however it's read when you go above 60 frames per second, there's definitely a drop in the image quality, and it's fairly noticeable. It kind of gets a bit grainy sometimes, and there's a lot more aliasing and moire. And we did look at this on the booth at IBC, and it looks to be doing a really good job. There is a little bit more aliasing. It's to be expected.
Yeah.
And this is just for the high speed mode. The HD from full frame or the HD from Super 35 looks really nice. But the high speed, above 60 frames per second, the 120 from that 2K scan, I think from what I could tell, looks better than an FS7 at 120 frames per second. It looks much nicer.
Right.
And for me, this is the whole thing about this camera. Actually, the big deal is it looks really nice. It just doesn't seem to matter how you use it. The picture looks nice. So I will come to some of those questions in a minute because they're relevant to what we'll do later. So
do you think? Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Do you think most people will still be recording in HD format anyway?
Well, certainly a lot of people will. We had a few broadcasters come up, and we were discussing this with them at IBC, and there's some are still going to shoot in HD, and it still has the MPEG HD codec in there, so it still has that legacy MPEG HD codec for the broadcasters in there. But more of them are now starting to shoot in UHD,
right?
Even though they're not going to broadcast it and deliver it in HD, because they are thinking about, well, in a couple of years' time, we might want to resell this footage, resell the program, and it won't be long now, I think, before a lot more broadcasting does start to happen in UHD, especially as the traditional broadcasters, the over-the-air broadcasters, move to doing more what in the trade is called over the top, which is your Netflix style or iPlayer style distribution. Because it's only a matter of time before iPlayer goes to 4K and UHD and even HDR. So they've got to start thinking about how we're going to, in a few years' time, if we want to reuse this program as content, then we have to start shooting in UHD.
Okay.
But definitely still a lot of people using HD. It's actually really surprised me. We've been doing UHD for a long time now, but HD is definitely not going away. But what I do know is that 4K DCI, so that's at 17:9, will be available. And there will be a 5K near full frame mode. So instead of reading the sensor at 6K, the sensor will get read at 5K, and it's 94. I think I've got a slide about it in a minute. 94% of full frame, or something like that, or 86. It's almost full frame, and that will happen at 60 frames per second. So you'll have almost full frame performance at 60 frames per second. And the HD recording will at least go up to 180 frames per second. I asked the engineers, will it go beyond that? And their typical answer is, we will study, which is their way of saying, if I do know, I can't tell you. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit more than 180. They've got to do 180 because they've got to match the FS7.
Yes.
But I wouldn't be surprised if we see 240, possibly via the raw output only, maybe. But that, again, it's my opinion, not Sony. This isn't from Sony, it's my opinion.
Sure.
And we also know that there'll be a raw output that will be up to 16-bit. And to have the raw output, you have to have the XDCA FX9 big ugly black box. It is ugly, that goes on the back, and that will be to a third-party external raw recorder. So it won't be XOCN on a R7.
Right.
And if you think about it, this camera's €11,000 list. An R7 with a couple of 1 terabyte cards is much more than that to buy. And then there'd have to be some adapter to go on to the R7 to make it work and everything else. I just don't think for somebody buying a £10,000 camera, they're not going to spend £15,000 on a recorder and an adapter and everything else. They're going to spend, but they will spend $1,500 on a new Shogun or whatever. So it won't be the existing Shoguns. It will be a new Shogun powered by the Atomos Neon processor.
Right.
So they've said they can do it. They said they will do it, but the product doesn't exist yet. I mean, they said they can do it on their new Neon range, but those start at 17 inches. And you're not going to want a 17-inch monitor on the top of your FX9. So they're almost certainly going to have to bring out an Atomos-sized recorder, but with that Neon processor in it to do it. So here's this lovely slide from Sony of what it sort of does and will do, and what will be supported in future future firmware updates, and possibly more. Now, one question that came up an awful lot at IBC was anamorphic. Does it do anamorphic? Anamorphic is one of the big things now. Everyone wants to shoot anamorphic, and anamorphic lenses are becoming more accessible. They are still frighteningly expensive for the decent ones. We were looking at some very nice ones. So we had on the Sony booth, on the Venice on the Sony booth, we had the 1.8 Cook anamorphic on there, and I think they're about close to £40,000, something like that for one. And we also had the some of the new Caldwell anamorphics, which again were very, very nice lenses, really, really nice. But again, you're looking at £35,000 for one lens. FX9s, and again, this is a really low-cost camera. How many people are realistically going to be spending that kind of money on lenses? I don't know. But the question was asked, will it do anamorphic? And The answer from Sony was no. But what's interesting is we had a good look at the sensor. Take a lens off, you can see the sensor and the ND filter that's there, and it's full height. It's a 6x5 full height, full frame sensor. Why would you do that if you were going to close the door on anamorphic?
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying it means we're going to get anamorphic. I'm definitely not saying we will get anamorphic, but let's just say they haven't closed the door.
No, the door's still open.
The door is still open. So if you want anamorphic, tell Sony, demand it from Sony, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get it. But obviously, you know, let's be realistic. If they did everything in this camera, nobody would buy Venice.
Yes.
But I think anamorphic is something they should at least be thinking about. So please, Sony, if you're listening, I think anamorphic would be nice.
Yeah.
We have dual base ISOs, 800 and 4000 in Cine EI, and similar base ISOs in custom mode as well. In custom mode, they just call it high and low ISO. And that is an actual change in the way the sensor operates. It's not just gain, it's two ISOs. You can assign the ISO change to one of the assignable buttons, so you can switch between them at the press of a button and it happens instantly. And in the Cine EI mode, you can't tell the difference between them. They both look the same. And this camera has remarkably low noise. Right. So one of the things we did just before the camera was launched, I was lucky enough to be involved with some testing, and we did a dynamic range test with a chart called a Xyla chart. And we had an FS7 and the FX9 side by side facing this chart. And to use this chart, it's got to be completely blacked out with black drapes everywhere, so there's no light reflections, because you need to have the blackest, darkest blacks you can get. And we also had two monitors, one for the FS7, one for the FX9. They were nice HDR X300 monitors from Sony, you know, really good monitors. Yeah. Turned all the lights out, got everything blacked out, and the first thing everybody in the room said was, oh, look at the noise from the FS7. Because on the monitor in that completely blacked out environment, in fact, to be honest, it doesn't have to be completely blacked out. You can see the noise from the FS7. It's obvious, yeah. It's there. Yep. The FX9 monitor was black, dark, and then the engineer from Sony tapped me on the shoulder and says, Alister, you do realize that's 4000 ISO? And I hadn't. Yeah. And it was beautifully clean, and just really took me back how clean it was at 4000 ISO. Switch it down to 800 and it's a little bit cleaner. There's not a big difference. I mean, I think there's about maybe 3 dB noise difference between the 800 and 4000, but even at 4000 it's really super clean. Okay. And this is a big deal, because this makes shooting in log and Cine EI so much easier. Because with the FS7, because it's a bit noisy, you really need to expose nice and bright. And you know, my recommendation is to expose around a stop and a half brighter on the FS7 to overcome that noise. With the FX9, you don't need to. In fact, even if you're about a stop under, you get away with it. You know, with the FX9, and that's definitely not the case with the FS7. Yeah. So you can shoot at the base ISO, base EI easily. And that then has all sorts of implications later on, actually, as you'll see with our LUT options that we have. You don't need to use EI anymore. So you just shoot at base, expose at base, better highlight range, because we now have 15 plus over 15 stops. And we actually counted when we did the test, the 15 steps on the Xyla chart. And with the FS7, we counted sort of 13 and a bit. The FX9 is definitely 15 steps there. And yeah, there's always a question when you do those dynamic range tests as to how usable the darkest ones are, but they were definitely showing 15 of them. Having that bigger dynamic range, not having to overexpose, means you have much better highlight range, but you still have an amazing shadow range, because this goes 9 stops under middle grey in terms of the shadow range, so it's really good. And it also has now integrated phase detection autofocus pixels, 561 of them, over 94% of the sensor, so go right out to the edge of the sensor. So this big-ish thing that the camera has now, is this really amazing autofocus system, which I'll come on to in a bit. But this sensor is not the Venice sensor. It was designed for this camera. Venice doesn't have autofocus. You know, this was designed for this camera. New pixel design, new color filters, so it's slightly different from an FS7, and that's how we get the Venice color science. So it's not just about how you process it; it's also about how the sensor captures the light. Quick image of the sensor. You can see it's full height, full frame. It's not masked, and this is with the ND filter in. And we looked at this a lot. The ND filter covers the entire sensor.
Yeah.
It doesn't mask any of it off. So in terms of what you can do in the future, it's quite interesting. So the big question is, how does it look, of course, because you can have all of these numbers and technology, and it's got 15 stops of dynamic range, but if it doesn't handle that dynamic range well, it's no good. So on the booth, the FX9 where I was, we had a Sony Venice camera either side of it. One was being racked. So Sony was showing how you can integrate Venice into a live shoot, and they're becoming quite popular for concerts and music shoots and theatrical performances and things like that, where they want that very, very filmic-like look. The ability to use film style lenses but still have full rack control, outside broadcast type control over the camera. And the one on the other side was fully rigged up with a Cook anamorphic and everything else. Absolutely, beautiful looking picture from that. And we're sitting in the middle with our little 11,000 euro FX9. Admittedly, it had a Zeiss Supreme on it. It's a very nice lens, but we've got cameras either side that, with all the kit that was on them, you're looking at 60, 70,000 pounds of kit each side, and they're all going on to pretty much exactly the same monitors. We had X310s for the Venices and X300 for the FX9, and frankly, you could barely tell the difference. Yes, the one with the Cook lens on it had that Cook look to it. Can't ever get away from that. So there was something about that image that's incredibly pleasing. The one that was being racked and the FX9, barely tell the difference. If you zoomed them out to the same shot, it was so hard. And even if you looked at the highlight end, because Venice is amazing in the highlights, and I'll show you the frame grab in a second. There's a light on the back wall of the shot, and the set was set up to challenge the camera. So Sony didn't just light it so that you couldn't reach the limits of the camera. And that light, you could on the Venice make it overexposed without blowing out the foreground. And we were just taking both cameras up to the point where that light is right on the edge of blowing out. The difference was tiny, tiny, tiny between the two of them. The Venice definitely had an edge, and that's what makes Venice, that little bit right at the top. So it's not a Venice, but it's so damn close that I wouldn't have a problem actually doing a shooting with Venice. And I shoot a lot with Venice now, and I love shooting with it. And then for those shots where I need to be super portable, where I need to get in that small space, where I need to perhaps run with the camera, do something like that, I'm going to be quite happy to go to the FX9 because I know it will cut in. And I know it's not going to jump out. It's not going to be obvious that that's been done with a different camera.
So it's very important. It's going to be very difficult, as you said, to see the difference, and you've got to.
And this isn't a baby Venice. Don't get me wrong. There are things about the way the Venice image is rendered that is incredibly nice. It's really beautiful. But this is so damn close. Venice is a fully kitted out Venice is going to cost you £60,000. This is £10,000. There's not that difference is going to be hugely hard to justify for a lot of people. I mean, if you're doing a major blockbuster movie, the cost of the rental of the camera is such a small fraction of your budget. You would use a Venice. You would definitely wouldn't choose an FX9 in that type of production. But I think for a lot of us, for us mere mortals, FX9 is lovely. So here we go. Let's have a picture. Let's have a frame grab. So to explain this frame grab, this is straight out of the camera with the S709 LUT applied to it. That's it. No grading. This is just shot at the base ISO at 4000 ISO, and I just slapped, for want of a better word, a LUT on it. And that's it. And that's how it looks. I think it's lovely. I think the pictures are to die for out of this camera. I really do. And this it's the lamp on the standard lamp, the one with the shade on it. That's the one that we were using as our limiter. So with the cameras we were taking up until that was just starting to over. And in fact, actually looking at the monitor, because obviously looking at a LUT on the monitor, it was just starting to go over. And when I applied the LUT on it, actually it looks really good. And I'm going to make this frame available to VI in its full 4K glory, and I'm sure they'll be able to find a way to make it accessible to you guys, so you can download it, and the LUT that I used, so you can see that I haven't cheated here. This is it. This is what you get. And if we zoom in, so zoom in a bit, because I'm sure you're looking at it at horrible low resolution via this webinar. I don't quite know how it comes out at the other end, or maybe on your phone or something.
It looks stunning here, but
I mean, you've got to bear in mind this is 4000 ISO. and there's some really dark shadowy areas in there. And yeah, there is some noise in there. It's not zero noise. If you look under the tables, you can see there is noise there, but it's really nice noise too. It's very fine. It's quite film-like. It's not as nice as Venice's noise, which is actually quite pretty, but it's certainly not objectionable.
No, it's
and yeah, really quite amazed at how it looks. Here's another. This is the full image again. So this was shot full frame, scanning mode, 6K, scan downsampled to UHD, recorded on the XQD card, XAVC class 300, just taken into Resolve, and just the LUT applied. That's it. No exposure change or anything, just the LUT. So I'll make the frames and the LUTs available for you to have a look at. So this is just a slightly different shot with a bit more color in it and everything else, and that lovely fall off you get with the shallow depth and the shallow depth field. So aperture was T1.9, I think, if I remember right, something like T1.9, T1.5. So we're using the ND, a lot of ND, because we're at 4000 ISO to be able to open up the aperture. And again, there's a blow up for you, 200% blow up, so you can really see what it looks like. It just renders color, skin tones, and everything else in such a pleasing manner. And I've had a lot of discussions with people on Facebook about this camera, and a lot of people saying, "Oh, I've got an FS7. Why would I want this camera? I can shoot 4K on my FS7 and everything else." And yeah, the FS7 is a great camera, but these pictures are to die for. They really are, and they're so easy to get. That's the thing. I quite honestly, I made a lot of money out of the FS7 telling people how to use it because it was hard to use. To get a decent picture out of it in Cine EI, getting their exposure right and everything else was difficult. And I made, doing training and workshops and events. I did well out of that camera. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that with this because you just turn it on, you press record, and it looks nice. And that's what we want, isn't it, out of a camera?
It's ideal for someone like me who doesn't know what they're doing.
Yes. So anyway, moving on.
And of course, sorry, before you move on, I'm just going to say, of course, you'll be able to see that live when we have our open day here. So, look out for that, because we'll be able to obviously have Alister's expertise, but you've got to see it for yourself, really. It's no point in, it's nice to have all the access to footage, etc., but to see it live, that's what you need. So, so please look out for that up and coming event. Sorry.
Anyway, so RAW. I love working with RAW, in particular with 16-bit RAW, because when you're taking 16-bit RAW out of a cam, you really are taking everything that sensor can deliver. Now, what's interesting, of course, this RAW will actually be downscaled from full frame 6K to 4K before it comes out of the camera. So it'll come out of the camera as a undemosaicked, undebayered, so it'll be essentially a black and white image, but at 4K when it started at 6. And I think a lot of people will question, is that actually really raw? Because obviously some image processing has taken place before it's come out. I think the key thing here is that it hasn't been debayered. So that means your white balance isn't really set in stone, baked in and everything else. I mean, talking about white balance, I think it's in the slide coming up. In Cine EI mode now, you can dial in whatever white balance you want and add a tint as well. So you can change your white balance and tint it. And you can literally any color temperature you want, and a huge tint range as well in Cine EI. You're not tied to presets anymore. And it's really, really easy to do. Actually, just press the white balance button on the side of the camera. That highlights the white balance on the LCD screen, and you can just turn the dial at the front, change it. Very, very easy. So I think it is raw. I think it's going to be 16-bit data and it's a single frame. It's not RGB or YUV component. So I think it would be justifiable to call it raw, even though it's been downsampled. If you want to do 120 frames per second, you'll get 120 frames per second, 10-bit raw, 4K from Super 35. So that's going to be really nice. So you'll have an option now to be able to shoot 120 frames per second. I think it's a shame it's only going to be 10-bit. I think there is a question there. Would I be better off with 10-bit log or 10-bit raw? But you have the option to be able to shoot with this camera 120 frames per second, 4K. And if I'm understanding this right, no cache. This will be continuous 4K, 120 frames per second raw. So that's going to be really nice. Now, it's not known what other frame rates may be possible with the raw output. but I would suspect there will be a 2K 180 frames per second. Now, if the camera can do it internally, you're probably going to get it externally on the RAW as well, and that might be 16-bit or 12-bit or some other bit depth. Yep. I don't know, but as I said already, Atomos have said that they're going to support this. So the 4K 120 frames per second really quite excites me. This is the back end of the camera, and you can see also the raw outputs on the back of the XDCA, but actually this image is here. I just put this here just to talk about the XDCA, because the black box, the big ugly black box that's on the back, because I think for a lot of us it's going to be the only reason we're going to buy it, because the time code in and out is on the camera body now.
Yes.
So you don't need the XDCA for that. You can use a V-Lock battery with a much cheaper plate than a €2,500 XDCA adapter. So it's a bit of a shame, but one of the things the XDCA does have for your raw recorder is it does have a DTAP out on it, which is switched, and a 4-pin HiROS out as well, which also has 2 pins used for record start and stop as well. So you will get that little bit as well, but we'll come on to the XDCA in more details in a minute. Viewfinder, very important thing. This is a new viewfinder. I know in the pictures, in the photos, it kind of looks like the old one, but it's all changed actually. Even the monocular, the optical bit, is different. The release lever that opens it underneath is huge, so it's much easier to find now. Yeah. It's still the same shape, it's still the same sort of optical design, and that's not to everyone's liking, I know, and it's still on the same square rod arrangement as an FS7, but the clamps have been upgraded, the pivot on the viewfinder's stronger. It's all been made a bit stronger. Yeah. But the key thing is now that this panel is 720p. The panel on the FS7 is, I think it's 540p. So it's quite a big, it's good 30, well, it's 1.8 times higher resolution. Yeah. And it's you look at it straight away, it's much sharper, much clearer. It's also got better contrast, it's brighter, so it's going to be better outside. It's all round a big improvement. Actually, it's not just a little improvement, it's much better. And they've also improved the peaking and everything else around the viewfinder. Right. So while it appears the same from the outside and everything else, this is now actually a very usable viewfinder. And the focus magnification is now done at a much higher resolution. On the FS7, you use focus magnification and it goes all muddy, and it's not actually that useful, to be honest, because the picture becomes so blurry, it's hard to see. Am I in focus? Whereas now the focus magnification, this isn't the focus mag, is really sharp. You know, that certainly the 4 times, it's actually, you can't tell that you've gone into the 4 times, but fortunately there's a big red line around the whole of the picture when you do that to tell you that you're in focus mag. So in the 4 times, you really don't, it doesn't look any softer. Sure. In the 8 times, just a tiny bit softer, but still very usable focus mag at 8 times. Lots of information in the viewfinder. Fortunately, you can turn it all off. Yeah. And you can go into the menu and decide what you want and everything else, but there's an awful lot of information in there. I mean, this is just the camera's set in its sort of show configuration for the show, so it's got just about everything turned on. The little thing with AP at the top that you can see with the little boxes by it, that's because there's an Ethernet cable connected into the camera, so you can actually remotely control the camera and stream and do all sorts of stuff over Ethernet and everything else with the camera, but we'll talk about it in a bit. So Cine EI, coming back to that, while we're talking about picture quality, because if you want the best picture quality, you probably use the Cine EI mode. So yes, white balance can be changed. Now the other big thing is lookup tables. So lookup tables, there are still some limitations. So lookup tables are in the current firmware available separate from your recording, so you're not forced to bake this in. Yeah. At up to 60 frames per second in S&Q when recording UHD. So you can have LUTs in S&Q and then your recording is still log, but only up to 60 frames per second. When you go above 60 frames per second, you switch down to HD recording. And there are some restrictions when you're using HD around the LUTs. So my suspicion is that the processor they're using for the LUTs is the same one that does the HD downsampling or something like that. So you don't have LUTs in S&Q when you're doing 120 frames per second right now. Having said that though, there is actually a separate Rec 709 LUT built into the camera for the viewfinder. Now it's called Viewfinder Gamma Assist, and you might have seen this in an FS5, but this is you know, taking this a little bit out, it actually is a proper Rec 709 LUT, but they haven't called it a LUT because you can't apply exposure index to it, so it's fixed at the base ISO.
Okay.
But you can have this basic Rec 709 LUT applied to the viewfinder no matter what you're doing. So even when you're in S&Q motion at 120 frames per second, etc., you can still have a LUT in the viewfinder, so you're not looking at the log, and that LUT, because you can now shoot at the base ISO, you don't need to shift your EI or anything like that. You can look at that LUT. If it looks right, your exposure is right, and shoot like that. Keeps it nice and simple. And this is, while it's not what we want, I think we all really want to have the proper EI LUTs in the viewfinder no matter what. I get that. I would like that. This is certainly a big step in the right direction, because for those of you that like shooting slow-mo, doing all of that stuff, at least now you can look in the viewfinder. You haven't got to think, is the exposure right? If it's underexposed, you're going to see it's underexposed. So it's going to, I think there'll be a lot fewer cases of, oh my God, why is my slow-mo so noisy and grainy? And it ultimately turning out because they were underexposed, because you'll be able to look at that viewfinder, look at this 709 in the viewfinder, and it's going to show your footage as being underexposed if it is. So it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Sure.
And that's available pretty much no matter what. One thing you do need to watch for is it's actually possible to have a LUT plus viewfinder gamma assist. So you basically then have a LUT on a LUT, and you just need to be careful with that. If you're using the LUTs, then turn off the gamma assist. If you're not using the LUTs, turn on the gamma assist. And yeah, as I said, because the noise levels are significantly low, there's no need to expose brighter. So you're just always going to be shooting at your base. So if you're shooting at 800 base ISO, use 800 EI. If you're shooting at 4000 base ISO, use 4000 EI. So that's really good. And as I said earlier, the S&Q at 120 does look much cleaner than what I've seen from the FS7, from what we could see at the show certainly. And there's something I will be testing in the coming weeks, so hopefully get some cameras to try and have a look at that, because I think that's really going to help people, because the slow-mo looks a bit cleaner, which the sensor's so much low noise anyway. I think you're going to get much better slow motion out of the camera. No S-Log2, because S-Log2 can't record over 14 stops of dynamic range, and this camera really genuinely does have over 15 stops of dynamic range. So S-Log2 has gone.
Nice.
Now, when we come out of Cine EI and go into custom mode, and the camera's split between custom mode and Cine EI, just like an FS7, F5, etc., you get the standard setting is what Sony are now calling S Cinematone, and that's just their name for what we've all been calling the Venice look. So it's not a replacement for log or anything else. This is now just the default look in this camera. Looks damned like a Sony Venice straight out of the box, without any grading, without anything else. And this essentially is that kind of FS5 Mark II default look as well. But because this camera has dynamic range now that's very similar to Venice, it's even closer to Venice than the FS5 Mark II is. So this is the out of the box look now in custom mode. It looks gorgeous. You do still have all the standard gammas. You've got 709, you've got hyper gamma. So if you want to match it with your FS7, etc., you can get very close. Now again, this is something I need to test a little bit more closely. So far we've only had sort of prototypes and things like that. But because you've got those standard gammas, because you've got the hyper gammas and everything else, you will at least be able to get very close to an FS7. It is a different sensor though, and it does have different color filters. So I suspect there will still be a subtle difference. I mean, if you've got two cameras doing two different camera angles on a shoot, you'd probably be fine. What you wouldn't want to do is the two cameras side by side doing the same shot, because that's where you'll spot the differences. But two different camera angles or two different locations, things like that, I'm quite sure you'll be fine. Autofocus to die for. I'm one of those guys that, for a very long time was, autofocus. And when Sony introduced me to the camera and they showed me some slides and said, yeah, and it does autofocus, I was like, yeah, okay, move on. What's next?
Who needs autofocus?
It's going to be an FS7 Plus with autofocus, or an FS5 Plus, which kind of like, it sort of works. And it's like, yeah, okay, show me the next thing. What else does the camera do? And I said, no, Alister, it does really good autofocus. I said, yeah, okay, what else does the camera do? And then I was a little bit involved in the Sony music video shoot that Sony did. And the first shot is done manually, really good AC, remote follow focus, everything else. The second shot was done with autofocus. And the shot starts with a pull focus from a plant trailing down in front of the lens of the camera. This is all Steadicam, so everything's moving, and tracks in onto Sony singer's face. And the pull focus was just looked like it was done by a human, because the AC had programmed the autofocus in the camera to respond in that way. And then it just, once it locked onto her face, and she's surrounded by plants, it just locked onto her eyes. And if you watch that video clip, it just doesn't drift all the way through that shot. It's absolutely solid. Yet the first shot, done the traditional way, even with an AC, with the proper monitoring and everything else, there are moments when her eyes are not in focus. And this is going to be the challenge of full frame. Full frame is really, really unforgiving. If you're going to be, the whole point of shooting with full frame is two things: wide field of view and shallow depth of field at the same time. And if you're going to be shooting at 2.8, which is what the Sony video was shot at, and these were I think 35mm lenses, if I remember right. Even 35mm 2.8, the depth of field is super shallow. So it's really hard to get your focus absolutely right. And I'm looking at this autofocus, and I've played with it a lot since and everything else, and I think I'm gonna want this, because it is so good. And even if you don't actually just sort of autofocus all through the shot, just being able to set up the camera and just press that one push auto button and know that the camera is going to be absolutely spot on your interviewees, your subjects' eyes, not their nose, not their ears, their eyes each time, is going to be a godsend. It's really going to be so
useful.
And because this is based on phase detection, it doesn't hunt. So your traditional sort of contrast-based exposure, autofocus, is actually very similar to the way we as human beings focus, which is you only know when you've got to the best focus by going a little bit out of focus. So even contrast-based autofocus will always hunt, because it only knows when it's at its best by going out of focus. Well, phase detection autofocus doesn't need to hunt in the same way to detect that it's out of focus, because it's all happening at the sensor level now. And the end result is autofocus that, if you're using the face detection and you use the joystick to go from one face to another, it just goes from one face to another without searching at the end. Am I there? It just goes and stays there. And then you can register that face, memorize that face. The person walks out of the shot, comes back into the shot, it just goes straight to the face and stays there.
Incredible.
It is. I can talk about it until the hind legs do fall off that donkey in the room next door. Like, why do you keep a donkey next door? But the best thing is to come and see it. So once these cameras get out, once they've got a few demo cameras going around, just go out and see it, try it, play for it for yourself, because talking about it doesn't do it justice.
No.
I'm going, damn you, Sony, because I've got a lot of Canon lenses, and I know that with a Metabones adapter or anything in between the camera and the lens, it's not going to be its best. I'm not even sure it's going to work at all, to be honest. It'll probably try to work, but I think you're really going to have to go to proper dedicated E-mount lenses. And we've got some questions about this, I notice. So it will work with any autofocus E-mount lens. Now, again, this is something we haven't tried. So the big question is about Sigma, Tamron. They make E-mount lenses, so we need to investigate how it works with those. But in theory, at least on paper, it should work. So I'm going to be looking over the next few weeks at my lens collection and looking Canon, and thinking that one I'll have to replace, maybe that one. I'm not going to replace all of them, but there's going to be some few choice lenses where I think for, perhaps my sort of favorite interview lenses, where I might use it. You're doing a one-man band interview and you're sitting there talking to the interviewee, at least with the autofocus, I know that even if the interviewee leans forward those few inches during the interview, that it's not all going to go horribly soft. That I can, rely on the autofocus to do that. So I think some lens changes. So yeah, so it will work with any E-mount lens. So your lenses for your alphas, etc., should all work fine. Of course, the 28 to 135 millimeter full frame lens that Sony launched some years ago that never saw a great deal of interest because it didn't work brilliantly on an FS7 because it was a full frame lens, is now actually going to become the kit lens.
Yeah. And
actually on this camera actually works really nicely. Yeah, really nicely.
I think Robin's asked that.
Yes.
How does it deal with stills?
Yes.
Lenses?
So that there. Yeah. And so it works really well with certainly the E-mount stills lenses. But of course, you can still use your manual focus lenses on it. That there's no real restriction. If you've got something like me, I've got the pair of the Fujinon MK lenses. They're super 35 millimeter lenses. I can still use them because I can switch the camera to super 35 millimeter mode. Yeah. Yes, okay, I won't get the full frame look, but I'll still have basically everything that the FS7 does in terms of resolution, frame size, recording bit rates and everything else. But now I'll have that Venice color science and 15 stops of dynamic range and less noise. So they're going to look much nicer on my an FX9. I say my FX9 because I have ordered one. My order has gone in with visual impact for an FX9. Right out of the box. So I don't need to get rid of those or throw them away. They're still quite possibly going to be my main lenses for a long time on that camera because they're going to look gorgeous on the FX9. So yeah, moving on. Time code in and out on the camera body. Finally. So the FX9, as I said, gives you the raw output. It also gives you a whole load of networking functionality. Yeah, we're moving into an era now where for television news in particular, satellite trucks are becoming a little bit less relevant. Still a huge place for them, and there's still lots of business there, I'm sure, for the satellite truck guys. But one of the things we can do with the XDCA FX9, and you can't put the old one on the camera. Your old FS7 one will not go on the FX9. You can only put the new one on it because the camera is actually a completely different shape. Right. Although it sort of looks FS7 shaped, it's much squarer. Yeah. Certainly at the back. Although your existing base plates, top plates, and everything else will go directly onto the FX9. Yeah. It has two USB slots for a pair of 4G or 5G dongles. They can be on two different networks. So if one network slows down, the other network takes over for streaming. The camera generates an H.264 stream while you're shooting, and you can record that as a proxy at different bit rates depending on your network connectivity and stuff like that. So straight away you've got the ability to push a signal from the camera, but we also have the ability with XDCam Air, the ability to push stuff to the camera, and that's where this gets really interesting. Again, we'll come on to that in a little bit more. Oh, back to that slide actually. Well, that's an interesting slide to look at. The multi-interface shoe connector there for the hand grip. So the hand grip, I'm coming on to ergonomics in a moment. The hand grip now plugs into the camera using, it's almost like a USB type connector using this multi-interface connection. And one of the things about that is much faster. So there's much less lag between the hand grip controls and the camera responding. So if you are using that 28 to 135, which, let's be honest, the zoom is not the most responsive zoom in the world, the fact that we get rid of the lag between the hand grip and the lens is much better, going to help a lot. And it's really, the hand grip is really far more responsive. You press a button and things happen instantly now. You're not waiting a moment for the menu to open or whatever. But right next to it, you see it says remote, and where it says remote, that's where there is a 2.5 millimeter LANC port, exactly the same as the FS7. So that means you can use either, and in fact, you can actually use both at the same time. So you could have a LANC controller doing one thing on the camera, perhaps set up to do focus, while you're using the multi-connector with your hand grip to do zoom. And that's opens up some interesting little options on the camera.
Yeah, I've got a question actually from Matt about the FX9. and control it. You can control it by an iPad, iPhone, over Wi-Fi.
Yes.
And he's saying, in reality, I've found that this doesn't work on some other cameras. Is there any way we can have a wired connection for the over USB or Ethernet, perhaps?
Don't know is the answer.
Okay.
So one of the things that the FX9 has that the FS7 doesn't have is, so the Wi-Fi is now built into the camera. The FS7 used to have a little dongle on the side.
Oh, right, maybe that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, and it's not a great system on the FS7. And the other thing, of course, the FS7 does, because it's a fully streaming capable camera, even if you don't have the XDCA FX9, you can use the Wi-Fi to connect to the internet, and you can stream from the Wi-Fi to the internet to your end destination. You can FTP as well. And I've got a separate slide about it, but seeing as we're here, one of the things you can do with FTP is you can push your footage to an FTP server. So if you've got the FTP server IP address, you just enter that into the camera and it'll push the proxies or your main footage to that server. But it does it in a way that if the internet connection drops out, it just continues as soon as the connection comes back.
Right.
So if you're moving around, perhaps if you're tethered to a phone and for a minute you're out of the range of the phone, that connection drops, it will reconnect and continue. Right. So this all now happens very much more in the background.
Okay.
And the other thing is, because it can stream a picture, when you use the new Content Browser mobile app that's going to come out when the camera is launched, you'll be able to see the pictures on the phone. So you're not just controlling the camera now from the phone, you'll have a live image. It's about a 4 or 5 frame delay. It's a very, very short delay. There is a delay, but there's a very, very short delay. But it just means if you're using an FX9, maybe you're lucky enough to have 2 of them or something like that, and one's a B camera doing a locked off shot, something like that, you could remotely see the picture. And that's not, do conferences. I used to do this a lot of conferences, 2 cameras, one's locked off, one isn't. But just being able to sort of remotely tweak the shot, zoom in, zoom out a little bit, bring your exposure up or down, change your white balance, because the lighting guys changed to some completely different light. Being able to do all of that and see the picture is really good. And possibly even just buy a cheap phone or tablet, because it'll run on any tablet. You don't need a fancy phone. And there is a lock button for the controls, so you'll be able to lock it so the controls won't work, and hand it to the director, producer as a preview monitor while you're shooting. You don't need a Teradek or all the fancy stuff. It's not going to have the range of a Teradek. It's not going to be as robust as that kind of link, but certainly provided he's close to you, I think it's a really nice, again, it's one of the, there's so many small little things in this camera that have all been a little bit upgraded, that when you add it all together, it makes it such a nice camera that I'm really excited about using and looking forward to. So coming on to ergonomics, so it is different to the FS7. It looks broadly similar to an FS7, but everything's been changed. So the menu is different. At first glance, you go, oh, it's the same menu, and then you look again, it's like, oh, actually, no, it isn't. It's different. And they've thought about it. So they've got a new industrial design team in Japan that have been looking at this. So all the things you use when you're shooting, focus controls, your focus programming for the autofocus, aperture, shutter speed, white balance, all those things, they're grouped together, close together in the menu. So the things that you use all the time are all close together, and they're under a heading called shooting. And then things like frame rate, frame size, which is another sort of thing that you tend to change perhaps at the beginning of the day. They're all grouped together, close together in the menu in project. So it's actually much easier to find things. They're closer to where you want them to be. So it makes a lot more sense the way it's done, and it's simple. There's still an enormous amount of stuff in there, because you've got cache record, interval record, and all of those modes and things, and Cine EI and log and LUTs and 4K outputs and not 4K outputs. So there's a lot of stuff in the menu, but it's been grouped much better.
Very good idea.
Now, another thing used to bug me on the FS7, and I'm sure a lot of other people, is the buttons for the shutter, for the iris. If you bumped them by mistake, the mode would change in the camera. And it wasn't always obvious. If you're looking at the picture, concentrating on focusing or something else, and you bump that camera, or you're just moving the camera around, you're just going from one shot to another, bumped it while you're moving, you shoot your next shot, you get back into the grading suite, it's like, why are the lights now flickering in that shot because the shutter speed has changed or something? Well, now you have to press and hold the button to get it to bring up. It brings up a little sub menu in the viewfinder, a little tiny short menu, as opposed to the full menu, and you can change your settings there. And then when you do go into auto, the button lights up. So what that means, and you can see it in the little picture here, in the next slide here, you can see that this is the auto button for the ND, and it's lit up. And it's the same for the iris button. You can see there's a little dot there on the iris button. That's where the LED is. So you can actually just look at the side of the camera and you know what's in auto. And if you want to switch it out of auto, I can just look at the side of the camera, press the button, the light goes out, I know it's manual. So again, a nice, and that was that came from feedback from us, from users. Sony are listening to us, and at IBC, if you were unlucky and you went and played with an FX9 that was on the booth, you will have been collared by one of the engineers from Japan. As you walked away from the FX9, they were just grabbing people, and they had their iPads and everything else. Like, right, what do you think of the camera? What would you like? What do you shoot on now? And they feed that stuff back, and it does get listened to. And this is a direct result of user feedback. Is I need a way to know when the camera's doing something auto. And another thing, if you look at the side of the camera, you've got the ND buttons here, plus, minus, and an ND button and a dial for the ND filter, but there's no knob on the front. That black knob that you can see here, that's for the menu system. That's a multifunction dial. It's used to have that big, thick black knob on the old ENG cameras. They all had it, and it was brilliant. And then it went away, it disappeared. Well, it's now back again, and it's really good. It's nice, big, chunky knob. You can use it with gloves on and things like that. It's what you want. But there's no dial for the ND filters now. It's entirely electronically done. So you've got to on and off, and then add your ND presets, and you can have lots of presets, or the single dial for the ND. And if you turn the dial all the way down, the ND filter comes out, and if you turn the dial all the way up, it comes back in again, and then is variable. So you only have one control now, because on the FS7 Mark II and the FS5, you've got one that engages it, and then another dial that changes it. Well, now it's all done with one dial,
which makes sense.
Well, of course it does. I mean, it's easy. Again, we can, in this picture, you can see the little LED indicators in those buttons that will light up when you have it. Now, another thing we've got with the camera is direct menu. So there's a button on the hand grip, you press that, direct menu, and you can use the joystick to navigate around all the icons in the viewfinder, directly set it and change it directly in the viewfinder. So you haven't even got to go into the menu half the time.
All right.
Audio control, we now have 4 knobs and dials for the audio. At last, hooray! Hooray! But at the moment, there's only a couple of gauges, audio level meters in the viewfinder. But if you press the status button and go to the audio page, you get 4 audio level meters. And now all the menus remember where you were last. So when you come out and go back in, they always go back to where you left off. So what that means is, if you're shooting with 4 channels of audio, is you scroll through the status page to the audio page, press the status button so it goes away, and then whenever you do need to see the audio buttons, audio settings, you just touch the status button, you see your 4 channels, you can see your audio, just touch it again, they go away again. So you do have 4 channels, and Sony will most likely implement 4 gauges on the LCD somehow in the future. Can't guarantee it, but there was a lot of discussion about it, and a lot of people saying, actually, you really need to do this. And they said, well, and then there was this how to do it. Do we have 4 small ones? Do we have 2, and then perhaps just a red indicator for 3 and 4 if they're going over, or do we do vertical ones, and discussion about how to do it. So I think they're listening to us, so hopefully they'll bring something very nice for us. And we talked about the remote control over Wi-Fi already, so we don't need to go into that. And there's your 4 audio dials with switches for channels 1 and 2. Then the input selections for 3 and 4 are done in the menu. This is the menu system that we have now. This PowerPoint presentation is a little bit rushed. I was on, flying home last night and here today. So you see you've got the shooting menu, and then you've got ISO, ND filter, shutter, exposure, white balance. All of those things are there and grouped together.
In some ways, it makes you wonder why they didn't do that in the first place. But
yes,
I suppose it's easy in hindsight.
Yes, it does. And then here's the project menu, which is where your base settings, record format, Cine EI, simultaneous record, because you can you have simultaneous record, 4K and HD sub recording, so that, as well as proxy recording. So we can record 4K and HD, so that's 4K and an HD full, full glory HD file together, or you can record 4K and a proxy. So you've got, or HD and a proxy. You've got all sorts of recording options in the camera now. Because this is aimed at the news companies, and they might need smaller files and all sorts of different files as well. And I think for the news guys, the autofocus is going to be absolutely fabulous, being able to just pop in it at that 28 to 135, zoom in, zoom out, autofocus, easy peasy. Networking, I'm not going to go into a lot of this because we've covered a lot of this anyway. So we've got the FTP, which I've talked about anyway. You can remotely log into the camera and trim clips. So if you're a news station and they've got XDCam Air, they can log into the camera via a web browser, edit your footage while you're shooting, and then upload almost like a finished edit and do all sorts of clever stuff. They can push things like clip numbering, clip naming down to the camera, even the sort of storyboard and stuff like that. So it all stays with the footage and stays with the files. And actually talking about this, so this is a metadata. Now, one thing that, and I spotted there was a question about this actually, before I come on to the lenses, was image stabilization. So the FX9, let's have a look at a prettier picture of the camera while we're talking about this rather than.
By the way, we have sort of not overrun well, we have a little bit, but I'm sure you'd rather listen to Alister and just finish up. So just bear with us, and
we'll try and finish up as quick as we can.
And we'll definitely go through everyone's questions, so don't worry.
Auto image stabilization. So obviously you can put an image stabilized lens on the camera. That will still happen. Still have optical image stabilization via the lens, but the camera records an awful lot of metadata now. So if you're using an E-mount lens and the camera knows what the focal length of the lens is, and that's an important part of it, it's got to know the focal length. So it's not going to work with lenses where it can't determine what the focal length is. So I think it should work through a Metabones adapter with most EF lenses, because I think that metadata, that still gets through. But the camera then has motion sensors in it that detects how it's moving. And that's recorded as metadata alongside the footage. And you can take it into, and this will be available, I believe, at launch, into Catalyst Browse, and in real time stabilize the shot in post. And they were showing it. They had a demo of it working at IBC, and it was really impressive. Because you can choose how much stabilization you've got. And it does it in real time. And because your resolution, if you're using the full frame sensor, is actually 4K, even after you've done that little bit of a crop in that needs to be done to make it work, you're still going to have more resolution than an FS7 has currently. So I was very impressed by it. It's not an extra cost option. It's going to be in Catalyst Browse, and they're currently talking to Apple, to Adobe, etc., so that there will be plugins in all your favorite NLEs to do it in post. So you'll just, and it's very fast. That was what amazed me. So Catalyst Browse, apparently with a decent computer, does it much, much faster than real time. And certainly at IBC, what they were showing was a live, this is the clip, press play, now it's stabilized, and it was playing back fully stabilized. I mean, yes, obviously it's going to be dependent on your computer, but it's extremely fast. It's not something that takes hours to render or anything like that. So it's going to be great to, let's say you're using an optically stabilized lens, and generally you're happy with all your footage, and then there's that one shot, and it's like, damn, that one's a bit wobbly. Click a button, stabilize it a bit more, and it goes. And the nice thing is, because you can, I think because you're going to be, I don't know what the plugins will do, but I would imagine if you're in Adobe or SCP, you'll be able to keyframe it. Is that one of the things you get with a lot of image stabilizing is it gets very floaty. Is it looks like the camera's floating, and it's slightly weird. Is that because you're able to turn it up and down and choose how much you can, and perhaps even choose between horizontal and vertical stabilization. I don't know. I'm speculating here a little bit. I think it'll be really nice. And certainly the demos I saw, it was very, very impressive, and just it's another a little free upgrade that this has over previous generations of camera that is very nice. So let's start going through these questions. Wow, S-Log2, has it gone? Yes, it has, because the camera is a 15.5 stop camera, and S-Log2 can't record that. So it's gone. It's just S-Log3. You still have S-Gamut3 and S-Gamut3 Cine to choose from. Can non-Sony E-mounts work with the AS face detect, etc.? I expect the camera will try to make it work.
Yeah.
Now, non-Sony, so Sigma, Tamron that are E-mount, I don't know, haven't tested it, haven't tried it. I suspect yes, it will work.
Right.
But going through an adapter, the problem is if you go through an adapter, it slows down the communication between the lens and the camera, you know, metabones, etc. It might work. You'll have to. We're going to have to try and see. I have no idea. In all honesty, I suspect no, because I think there's going to be too much delay, and I think it'll confuse the phase detection system.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is the honest answer?
Yeah,
We're going to have to try.
Come in and have a look.
So we've got someone. So Sam has the 28 to 135. I have the 28 to 135 for broadcast. We need to record in UHD 50p, so we can still output true HD 50i, but the FX9 can only record in 50p in crop mode. Yes, that is correct. Is this the right lens for that? Yes, because don't forget there will be in the future firmware update, which and I think this is going to be early in that update cycle, the almost full frame 50p mode.
Right.
So you'll have UHD almost full frame quite early on in the update cycles of the camera. So that is the lens that you want. I really do think. If your other option is the 18 to 100 to 110, that's going to limit you all the time to Super 35. I think you're better off with the 28 to 135 on this camera.
Perfect. I wasn't very happy.
Yes.
Either.
So yes. So So this is a linked question really. So and this is about the MI shoe that's on the FX9. So on the top handle, let's see if I can find a picture without taking ages. So on the top of the camera, there is the MI shoe. It'll be one of the. Let's see where we are. Okay, I can't find the picture. There is an MI shoe on the top of the handle of the camera. You can see it in this front on picture. And the MI shoe allows you to take audio into the camera. So those of you that don't know about it, you can take your audio directly into the camera. This is now the new digital MI shoe. So the link into the camera is digital. So if you have the new UWPD radio mics that were launched at NAB, they output digital. So it goes from the radio mic digital into the camera digital, no interference problems, no issues like that. The same, there's now a new XLR adapter as well, and that is also now digital. Right. So you can go XLR digital MI shoe into the camera, no interference problems, none of those issues.
Impressive.
It's still backwards compatible with your legacy analog UWPD radio mic. So if you've got analog, no problem. No problem. It's exactly the same. Yeah. But this now is the new digital one, so it is going to be far less prone to any interference problems or anything like that. And it's a really nice system.
So hopefully Sam, that'll answer that.
Yes, question. I hope that answers that. Is the autofocus function to switch to faces during recording unique to the FX9? No, it's not unique to the FX9. The alpha cameras have this as well, and this technology actually largely comes from the alpha cameras. So the A9 in particular has an amazing face detection and eye focus. So this is from those cameras, and the big deal about it is not just face detection, it's the fact that when it's got a face, it's the eyes that it focuses on. And at the moment it's only human eyes, but I believe that ultimately animals will get added as well. Oh my word. Well, it is on the alphas now, so they'll do cats, dogs and everything else. You want to take a picture of your cat? You want their eyes to be in focus, not the tip of their nose and then fuzzy eyes. So it does seem weird and bizarre. Yes, I know, and perhaps it is, but yes, it does come from those alphas. And so someone's asked, is it reliable for everyday use? Absolutely it is. Right. I think there's going to be a lot of times where it will focus better than I can. And I hate to say that. I have 30 years of working with manual cameras and manual focus. I used to film motor racing and cars racing towards me and stuff like that. I would have died for this with that. Because it's not just about faces. It tracks other objects as well. To have something for anyone filming stuff that moves a lot, it's going to be a godsend. It really is. Now, will there be other Sony EVFs for the FX9? I don't know is the answer. If we demand them, perhaps. But again, this is a cheap camera, 11,000 list euros. If they bring out something like the F55 viewfinder, as taking that as an example, if I remember right, that viewfinder was £5,000.
Yeah.
You know, how many people are actually going to spend £5,000 on a viewfinder that probably won't be any higher resolution? This is now a very high resolution viewfinder on this camera. I don't know. I doubt it somehow, but it's possible. I don't know. Somebody's asked what's my role at Sony. So I don't work for Sony. I'm not a Sony employee. If you cut me in half, it probably does say Sony through the middle of me. And I don't hide that. I don't pretend otherwise. I've shot with Sony cameras for 30 years. My very first camera that I purchased was my first broadcast television camera was a Sony. And they have served me incredibly well over 30 years. I trust them. I rely on them. They've made my career what it is. Yes, I've used other cameras. I've used Alexas. I've used Panasonic cameras, JVC cameras, Canon cameras. I owned a C300 for a while. So I do have a broad experience of other cameras, but I'm a Sony guy. Don't work for them, but I'm a Sony ICE and a Sony ambassador. And as a Sony ICE, I am paid by Sony to go to events like IBC to help their customers out. I use their cameras. So what that means, and I've used the FX9, so it means that people at IBC could come to me and say, what do you think of the FX9? How does it do this? From a camera operator's point of view, what do you like about it? And I can answer from that. I'm not a sales rep. I'm not a salesperson. I actually shoot with this stuff, help make the demo videos and do stuff like that. And also Sony ambassador. Don't know, not going to pretend otherwise. So I am being paid by Sony to be here today to give this talk. But these are my opinions, and Sony, Sony are quite, they're not quite, they are very free at letting me say what I think.
I was going to say, I can certainly vouch for Alister. We've known each other for a few years, and certainly if he didn't think this camera was up to scratch, he would say so.
No, I would. And it's things like the LUTs. Yes, please, 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 Sony, give me LUTs in all frame rates in all modes. They haven't. Damn you, Sony. I can say, it would be. I think, I'm not going to call it a weak point on the camera, but it's a disappointing point, perhaps. But you still have this viewfinder LUT though, so they've found a workaround at least for it. So we're not left in the dark there. So anyway,
would the 750
match
with the 450?
450, and would you? That's an interesting one. They do look quite different. The Z450 being a single chip camera has a different look to the picture to the 3 chip cameras, and they do look a bit different. They're not, I don't think they're so different that you couldn't use the two together, but they're not going to match, and you would be able to tell which is which.
Okay, moving on.
Will Sony make an external RAW recorder for the FX9 like the R5, R7? Everything that I heard from Sony was this will be third-party support for the RAW from this camera. R7, R5 is going to be far too expensive. It's going to be going to cost more than the camera costs. I mean, I don't think people actually, a lot of people, if you have never look at how much AXSM media costs. You're talking of thousands of pounds, not just £500, thousands of pounds for a single card. And I think at this level, that's just nuts. I'd much rather actually, although it's external, have a Shogun, a £100 SSD on the back. You can buy lots of them then. That, I think, is the sweet spot really for this camera. If you compare both cameras sidewise, is there a big difference or the same? I'm assuming we're talking perhaps about FS7. They are very similar in size. In fact, the camera is the same height because if you put a top plate with a, in fact, this camera that is in this picture is rigged up with the Focus PL adapter, and that's attached to the top plate to give it more strength. But this is the standard FS7 top plate and adapter. So the camera is actually exactly the same height. The shape of the bottom of the camera is exactly the same. So if you have a shaped base plate, like the Focus one, again, that we see in this picture, goes straight on. It's a little bit longer than the FS7, about 30-40 millimeters longer. In terms of width, I think it's about the same. I didn't actually measure, but it looks to be about the same width. So basically it's just a little bit longer, and a tiny bit heavier. Now, one thing to be aware of, actually, it's reminded me of a very good point, is it uses more power though. We've got much more processing power in this camera for the LUTs, for the streaming, for the viewfinder gamma assist, for all of these extra things that this camera has to be able to read out 6K. So, and all the future stuff that's coming. So it uses almost twice as much power as an FS7. So if you're using it still takes the same batteries, still takes the BPU batteries, but they're only going to last half as long. So BPU 60 is only going to last you about an hour and a half, something like that, whereas it would almost last 4 hours or 3 hours. You're draining the battery a bit faster, so it tends to load the battery a bit more. So the little BPU 30 on this camera, Sony, if you're listening to me, when you ship these cameras, please don't ship it with a BPU 30. Please be generous to your customers, put a BPU 60 in there, because that's going to be your minimum realistically. BPU 30, you're going to get 15, 20 minutes out of it. So you're going to want the bigger batteries, possibly V-mount batteries with this camera, because it does use a bit more power.
I think we've covered this before, but with the autofocus again with the Canon EF lenses.
I really don't think autofocus Canon EF, we're going to have to try it and see. And until we try it and see, I don't know. I can guarantee you it won't be anywhere near as good as using a proper E-mount lens. It might kind of work, which is the case now with the FS7. Using an FS7 or an FS5 in autofocus with a Metabones adapter and a Canon lens, it kind of works, but not really.
Okay, Paul is asking on that, some nice comments. Thank you very much. But also he's saying about the F5 and FS7
on a
multicam, matching colors. Do they look different?
Right? So yeah, I mean, even the FS5 and the FS7 look a little bit different, and they've actually got the same sensor, and that's down to the different image processing. Generally, I think on a multi-camera shoot, if they're two cameras doing two different shots, the FS5 and the FS7 can be made to match, certainly close enough that you can do that. And this camera, again, it should be similar. It's a different sensor again, it's different processing again, so it won't look identical, but it's got the same, in custom mode, you do have access to the same gamma curves, the same hyper gammas and everything else. So it should look broadly similar, and provided they're different camera angles or different, I think you'll get away with it. But I think ideally in a multi-camera shoot, you would want all the same cameras. It's never ideal to mix and match, but it should, for most people, you'll get away with it, I think. Can you center scan in the same way as the FS7 when shooting HD? No is the answer, not currently. But again, this list of what might come is huge. I can't say that I asked about it in particular. It's something I kept meaning to ask, and it's certainly something that the engineers are aware that we would like. I would be surprised if it doesn't, but I don't know for certain. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question with clarity. But I can't see why not, because the sensor, the pixel pitch is the same as an FS7, so center scan would give you 2K, which makes for good HD. It would be daft for it not to do it, and there's plenty of processing power. So if you use the 2835 in 50p UHD with 83% crop and the 5K mode after firmware update, it becomes a 34. Yes, you're right. Doesn't seem very usable. 30, but you've got to remember 34 millimeters with that size of frame is a wide angle or fairly wide lens. 30. You're not talking 35 millimeter on a super 35 camera. You're talking 35 millimeter on something that is actually closer, pretty damn close to full frame. It's up if you're somebody that shoots wide stuff all the time, then you're gonna have to buy a prime lens, or something else, or save up lots and lots of money, because we're supposed to be getting onto it for this, the 16 to 35 millimeter cine. The 16 to 35 millimeter cine style zoom, which is designed for this camera. 16 millimeter. If you want wide on a full frame, that's damned wide. But this is not going to be cheap. I mean, I think I heard someone say 5,000 euros. But it's designed for full frame shooting, either on Venice or on the FX9. So this is also aimed at Venice, this lens, because that has E-mount as well. So it has a removable zoom servo, So the FX9, you'll be able to zoom in and out from the hand grip, and autofocus on a cinema style lens. And the way the autofocus servo engages is quite clever. So if the camera isn't in autofocus, it disengages. So it behaves just like a cinema lens, nice big pitch rings and everything else. So it's very much like using a cinema lens. When you turn the autofocus on, the servo engages and it becomes an autofocus lens.
Nice. Okay. What about the proxy files have the same time code as UHD files?
Yes, yeah. All the names are the same, file names are the same, time code is the same, and that's the whole point, that you can relink back. So in a news application, the news company could pull the proxies off the camera while you're shooting. Yeah. They could do an offline edit as soon as the footage gets back to the studio, whether that's yourself or perhaps later on FTP'd over a better connection. Yeah. They can just conform from the other files, and time code and everything else all matches. Okay. So do I see this as being a Venice B cam? I do, indeed. I think there will be applications where Venice is your main camera, but for some reason, perhaps you need to get it into a small space, need something much more handheld, whatever, that there will be a place for this as a B cam. And in the finished production, yes, they will cut together, and the audience might not ever realize. I mean, there's going to be a difference. I mean, Venice recording XOCN is artifact free really, whereas this at the moment, XAVC 300, it's compressed. Yes. So they're going to look they're going to look a little bit different. The camera does have 12G SDIs on it, but at the moment they're not enabled as 12G. So at the moment there is only HD out of the SDIs, but in the future you can expect to have 4K out of the SDI, so you can record externally on a less compressed format, such as ProRes, maybe again with an Atomos product or something like that, or take the 16-bit RAW out as well. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think there'll be a lot of cases where it will get used alongside Venice on big budget productions. Maybe something where autofocus is going to be a big thing. Maybe somebody's doing something running on a Steadicam, or where everything's moving and that autofocus becomes really important.
Yeah. Okay.
Does it do HLG? Yes, it does. It does 2020 color as well. Can I use the Shogun Inferno with this, which outputs S-Log2? You won't be able to use the Inferno is certainly not for log. It's going to be a new product for the raw output, completely new product, much more processing power. If you were to take the HDMI, so the HDMI now can output 10 bits up to 30 frames per second. So you can get 10 bit out of the camera, 10 bit 422 up to 30 frames per second to an external recorder, and you will have to use S-Log3. So I mean, the Inferno has S-Log3 in it, so that's what you're going to have to use. It's only RAW that used to be tied to or still is on the FS7 tied to S-Log2. Yep. This is a whole new beast, bigger dynamic range, bigger anything else. They're going to have to change the way that workflow works. It will have to be based around S-Log3 now.
Sure.
So what else have we got? Will the FX9 be able to shoot 16-bit XOCN later? I very, very much doubt it. And we've kind of discussed this already. Just the cost of the media at this price point makes it prohibitive. Nobody's going to spend, or very few people are going to spend £3,000 or £4,000 on a card and an R7, which is £6,000 or £7,000 plus an adapter and everything else with this camera. And to be honest, ProRes RAW is now opening up to the other NLEs. So that was one of the things that was announced, at IBC is much broader ProRes RAW support now. So one of the ProRes RAW in many respects is not dissimilar to XOCN. It's doing the same thing. We're taking the RAW, we're making it smaller, and that's going to allow us to record it in a compact, easy to work with file, which is that's the whole point of XOCN. So really, and I think for this level of camera, ProRes RAW ticks all the right boxes. So what else have we got? How does the camera deal with stills lenses? I think we covered that already, because yes, all your remount lenses will go straight on there. You can control the iris of the stills lenses either using the dial on the hand grip or using the assignable multifunction dial on the front of the camera. The big fat dial that works the menus can also, when it's not driving the menus, be used to control the iris on a stills lens. Okay. With the reduced noise in S-Log and the dual ISO, in what situations would you use hypergammas over S-Log3? Still under exposure. because log has a roll off in the shadows. So you go down below middle gray, you're rolling off your footage.
Yeah.
That's never a good thing. Yeah, you can have the lowest noise in the world, but you won't have any data down there. So if you're underexposed, don't use log. Log is for correct expose and beyond. The beauty of it now is that that sort of point where you hit correct exposure is realistically lower than it was with the FS7.
Okay.
I already own the 12-24 Sam wide angle full frame lens as well, so good for you. It's going to be awesome on this camera, but without inbuilt stabilization. Yeah, but you don't forget you've got the metadata stabilization. A wide angle lens like that, you don't need a lot of stabilization. It's so wide that you've got to really be waving the camera around before it becomes wobbly.
Yeah.
You've got the metadata stabilization, so you'll be able to use it that way and do the post stabilization.
Yeah.
The reason why we don't have IBIS in these cameras is because these cameras are designed for video where the sensor is continuously running, possibly for hours and hours and hours at a time, and they can never be allowed to overheat, and also you want a constant noise level. The sensor temperature is controlled, and it's not actually cooled, it's held at a constant temperature. And so with this camera, I believe what's happening is the sensor's drawn in over the electronics compartment, which is sealed, so everything's now weather sealed, and then over the sensor. So the sensor's actually warmed up to maintain a constant temperature. And to do that, the sensor has to have a heat sink on it. And also then the sensor's attached to the ND filter, because the relationship between the sensor and the ND filter can't change, because that would result in vignetting.
Yeah.
That makes it heavy, and it's too heavy to stabilize. You cannot move that sensor with an IBIS system or something like that because it's just too heavy. So you're not going to get IBIS in a camera like this because the sensors become too heavy. So that's why it's not there. It's not that Sony are trying to deliberately limit us with something. We're not having it. It's just that becomes too heavy to function, too heavy to work.
Yeah.
And that's why they've introduced this way of stabilizing in post. I mean, some other manufacturers stable electronically in camera, but the problem is that once that's in and done, you can't undo it.
Yeah.
So if you do think that that's degraded your image too much, you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
By doing it in post, you have choices. You can choose how much you zoom in, how much you stabilize. So you can play that trade-off game between zooming in too much, having super stable image, but losing too much image quality. But you can choose. You have choices.
Okay.
Is it possible to switch the face to the face focus on during recording on alpha cameras as well? I'm not sure. I believe so.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know the alphas as well as I do these. Sorry. Do you think the Super 35 4K image should be as good as sharp as the FS7? Yes, it will be exactly the same. Because that's why this sensor is 6K. This is the whole point. Because if you have a 6K sensor, full frame, what that means is the Super 35 is 4K, exactly the same as every other 4K Super 35 camera out there. So the sensor area is the same, 4K pixels the same. So in Super 35 mode, it performs the same as an FS7 in terms of the image area, the resolution, your recording codecs, and everything else. The only thing that's different is bigger dynamic range, lower noise, Venice color science. So it's going to look a lot nicer than an FS7.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is the thing is, in custom mode, for a lot of people that shoot in custom mode where they don't have time to grade and everything else, this really is an enormous step.
Yeah.
If you want a filmic image, if you want that beautiful warm skin tones, soft skin tones and everything else, this camera looks gorgeous. And we had numerous people actually coming up to the booth on Sony and says, how do you get the picture to look like that? And they're looking at the picture on the monitor and say, how do you know? So, well, it's a combination of the lens. You have Zeiss Supreme, very, very nice lens, and color science. This is what happens when you have this new color science, new gamma, new everything, and you bring it all together, you get this really nice looking image. Does the 16-35 have inbuilt sandbox? No, it doesn't have inbuilt stabilization. It doesn't. It's a cinema lens. It's going to be used on a Steadicam. It's going to be used on a gimbal. It's going to be used on a tripod. It's going to have all sorts of other ways of stabilizing, not inbuilt stabilization.
Okay. That's fantastic.
So, wow.
Really
one last shameless plug. Oh, goodness sake, questions are still coming in. Is the UWPD dual channel receiver with an electronic face coming soon for the FX9? Yes, it's already available, I believe. Can you answer that, Rob? Do you know UWPD? Is it? It was announced. It was launched at NAB, so it was actually launched
I think it is available,
back in April, and it also works on the Z280 and the Z190. They also have this new UWP interface. I'm sure it's available already. It's available now. Yes, a new radio mic and a new adapter. So you can't use your old analog mic on the new adapter.
I think it's only single channel.
It is. Yes, you're right. It is only single channel. You wanted a dual one. Yes.
Right.
No, at the moment there's only a single channel one. There isn't a dual one yet. Whether there will be, I don't know. I hope so. Everyone's been asking them for one, so I'd hope they do one.
Okay.
So our shameless plug, if you want to come up and join me in Norway, Northern Lights trips, I've got some spaces open on that next year. Go to the website and you find out more information there. We will get the still frames from the camera on the VI to you guys somehow. I will negotiate with Rob as to how we do that. We'll make sure you can get those frames. The Northern Lights trips, you can come and learn how to shoot video. You can come and just have a good time. Bring your wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. It's fun. It's not a workshop. It is fun, but I do also, those people that want help them. We have a couple of very good photographers there that will also help you on the photography side. It's a lot of fun. I will have an FX9 there, so there's an opportunity. It's in January to see an FX9 in action if you want to see that, play with that. It's a lot of fun.
Sounds good. Right, thanks very much for attending and for giving us some really interesting questions for Alister to look at. And a big thank you to obviously Alister, who literally was in IBC yesterday, yes, until in Amsterdam, travelled over and did the presentation, as you said, on a laptop on the plane. Got here this morning, so thanks very much for Alister.
You're welcome, and we'll I think the big thing is, I think it's one of those cameras you can talk about it all you want, but I think you need to see it. Put your hands on it, see how different it is. Have a look at the autofocus, have a look at the pictures straight out of the box. I don't think people quite get how much nicer it is. And have a look. And it, they're due to start shipping at the end of the year, sort of end of November, December time. I'm sure VI will probably get some into rental. And that would actually be my ultimate advice to anybody. If you're not sure, if you're a bit on the shelf, I mean, I have my own little saying: if you're not sure, don't. Don't rush out and buy something. If there's something in the back of your mind saying don't. So I would say to you, give it a few, wait until after Christmas. There'll be some in rental. Talk to Rob, talk to the guys here, see if you can hire one with an FS7 as well, and try it. See it. You're going to be, if you're going to put 10 grand down on a camera, it's a big investment. You've got to pay for it and all the rest. Hire one for the cost of hiring one, and I'm sure Rob will do you a great deal. Hire one for the day, try it, play with it, use it, and see if it is right for you.
Sure. And I think you've got two steps in it, haven't you? You've got the first step, as you say, we'll have a live event here where you'll be able to come along, compare the FS7 Mark II alongside the FX9, get Alister to take you through it. You'll have all of that information, and then go and think about it. And then, as you said, we will have quite a few in hire, so you'll be able to hire it as well.
I mean, the FX9 is a phenomenally exciting camera. I really do. Yes, you could just call it a souped-up FS7, but then you could call it a dumbed-down Venice. Where it's in the middle there somewhere. So I think it is a very exciting camera. The FS7 isn't going to die. It's not going to. It's not some. If you've got an FS7, it's not like, oh my God, it's the end for my FS7. It just is a new camera, and we get these new cameras and they come along. So don't go into panic mode. But have a look at it, have a play with it, see what you think.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alister, and thanks everyone for listening and joining in. Hope you enjoyed it, and bye for now.